Zhuangzi. Chapter 1. Wandering Far and Unfettered. There is a fish in the Northern Oblivion named Kun, and this Kun is quite huge, spanning who knows how many thousands of miles. He transforms into a bird named Peng, and this Peng has quite a back on him, stretching who knows how many thousands of miles. When he rouses himself and soars into the air, his wings are like clouds draped across the heavens. The oceans start to churn, and this bird begins his journey toward the Southern Oblivion. The Southern Oblivion. That is the pool of heaven.
The Equalizing Joke Book, a record of many wonders, reports, when Peng journeys to the Southern Oblivion, the waters ripple for 3,000 miles. Spiraling aloft with the whirling winds, he ascends 90,000 miles into the sky, availing himself of the gusting breath of the mid-year to make his departure. It's a galloping heat haze. It's a swirl of dust. It's some living creature blown about on the breath of the air. And the blue on blue of the sky. Is that the sky's true color? Or is it just the vast distance, going on and on without end, that looks that way? When Peng looks down, he too sees only this and nothing more.
Now, if water is not piled up thickly enough, it has no power to support a large vessel. Overturn a cup full of water in a hole in the road, and you can float a mustard seed in it like a boat. But if you put the cup itself in there, it will just get stuck. The water is too shallow for so large a vessel, and if the wind is not piled up thickly enough, it has no power to support Peng's enormous wings. That is why he needs to put 90,000 miles of air beneath him. Only then, bearing the blue of heaven on his back and unobstructed on all sides, can he ride the wind and make his way south. The cicada and the fledgling dove laugh at him, saying, "We scurry up into the air, leaping from the elm to the sandalwood tree, and when we don't quite make it, we just plummet to the ground." What's all this about ascending 90,000 miles and heading south? If you're only making an outing to the nearby woods, you can bring along your 3 meals for the day and return with your belly still full. If you're traveling 100 miles, you'll need to husk grain for the journey the night before. And if you're traveling 1,000 miles, you'll need to save up provisions for 3 months before you go. What do these 2 little insects know? A small consciousness cannot keep up with a vast consciousness. Short duration cannot keep up with long duration. How do we know? The morning mushroom knows nothing of the noontide. The winter cicada knows nothing of the spring and autumn. This is what is meant by short duration. In southern Chu, there is a tree called mingling, for which 500 years are as a single spring, and another 500 years are as a single autumn. In ancient times, there was even one massive tree whose spring and autumn were each 8,000 years long. And yet nowadays, Peng Zhu alone has a special reputation for longevity, and everyone tries to match him. Pathetic, isn't it?
This is exactly what Tang's question to Ji amounted to. In the barren Northland, there is a dark ocean called the Pool of Heaven. There is a fish there several thousand miles across, with a length that is as yet unknown, named Kun. There's a bird there named Peng, with a back like meat tie, and wings like clouds draped across the heavens. In a spiraling ascent that twists like a ram's horn, he climbs 90,000 miles, breaking through the clouds and bearing the blue of the sky on his back, and then heads south, finally arriving at the Southern Oblivion. The skull quail laughs at him, saying, "Where does he think he's going?" I leap into the air with all my might, but before I get farther than a few yards, I drop to the ground. My twittering and fluttering between the bushes and branches is the utmost form of flying. So where does he think he's going? Such is the difference between the large and the small. And he whose understanding is sufficient to fill some one post, or whose deeds meet the needs of some one village, or whose personal virtues please some one ruler, or who is able to prove himself in a single country, sees himself in just the same way. Even Song Rong would burst out laughing at such a man. If the whole world happened to praise Song Rongzi, he would not be goaded onward. If the whole world condemned him, he would not be deterred. He simply made a sharp and fixed division between the inner and the outer, and clearly discerned where true honor and disgrace reside. He did not involve himself in anxious calculations in his dealings with the world. Nevertheless, there was still a sense in which he was not really firmly planted. Now Liezi got around by charioting upon the wind itself, and was so good at it that he could go on like that in his cool and breezy way for 15 days at a time before heading back. He was someone who didn't get caught up in anxious calculations about bringing the blessings of good fortune upon himself. Nevertheless, although this allowed him to avoid the exertions of walking, there was still something he needed to depend on.
But suppose you were to chariot upon what is true both to heaven and to earth, riding atop the back and forth of the 6 atmospheric breaths, so that your wandering could nowhere be brought to a halt. You would then be depending on what? Thus, I say, the utmost person has no definite identity. The spirit-like person has no particular merit. The sage has no one name. When Yao went to cede the empire to Shu Yu, he said, to keep the torches burning in broad daylight would be making needless trouble for oneself. To continue watering one's garden during a heavy rainfall would be pointless labor. Now you, sir, so much as appear in the world, and at once it is well ordered. And yet here I am, playing the host and master, 15 acting like I control it all. I feel I am greatly deficient. Please accept the rulership of this world from me. Zhu Yu replied, you are ruling the world, and thus is the world already ruled however you rule it. If I were nonetheless to take your place, would I be doing it for the name? But name is just a guest of the real. Shall I then play the role of the guest? The tailor bird lives in the depths of a vast forest, but uses no more than a single branch to make his nest. When the beaver drinks from the river, he takes only enough to fill his belly. Go home, my lord. I have no use for an empire. Although the cook may not keep the kitchen in order, that doesn't mean the impersonator of the deceased, or even the priest who arranges the ritual vessels, needs to leap over the sacrificial vessels to replace him. Shoulder Self said to Unc Lincoln, I was listening to the words of the madman G.A.U. He talked big without getting at anything, going on and on without getting anywhere. I was shocked and rather scared by what he said, which seemed as limitless as the Milky Way, vast and excessive, with no regard for the way people really are. What in the world did he say? There are imponderable spirit-like persons who live on distant meat guy with skin like ice and snow, gentle and yielding like virgin girls. They do not eat the 5 grains, but rather live by breathing in the wind and drinking in the dew. They ride upon the air and clouds, charioting upon soaring dragons, wandering beyond the 4 seas. They just concentrate their spirits, and straightway, all things are free from sickness, and the harvest matures. I regard this as crazy talk, which I refuse to believe. No surprise there, said Unc Lincoln. The blind have no access to the beauty of visual patterns, and the deaf have no part in the sounds of bells and drums. It is not only the physical body that can be blind and deaf. The understanding can also be so. If you were then to agree with his words, you would be acting like a virgin girl who has just reached her time. Such persons, or the virtuosity in them, would be spreading everywhere through the 10,000 things until all are made one. while the current world is busy groping toward its own chaotic order? Why would they wear themselves out fretting about the world as if it were something to be managed? Such persons are harmed by no thing. A flood may reach the sky without drowning them. A drought may melt the stones and scorch the mountains without scalding them. From their dust and chaff, you could mold yourself a Yao or a Shun. How could they consider any particular thing worth bothering about? It is like a ceremonial cap salesman of song traveling to Yue, where the people shave their heads and tattoo their bodies. They have no use for such things. After Yao brought all the people of the world under his rule and put all within the 4 seas into good order, he went off to see 4 of these masters of distant Mingai at the bright side of the Fen River. Astonished at what he saw there, he forgot all about his empire. Huizi said to Zhuangzi, "The king of Wei gave me the seed of a great gourd. I planted it, and when it matured it weighed over 100 pounds. I filled it with liquid, but it was not firm enough to lift. I cut it in half to make a dipper, but it was too wide to scoop into anything. It was big and all, but because it was so useless, I finally just smashed it to pieces."
Zhuangzi said, "You are certainly stupid when it comes to using big things. There was once a man of song who was skilled at making a balm to keep the hands from chapping. For generations, his family had used it to make a living washing silk through the winter. A customer heard about it and asked to buy the recipe for 100 pieces of gold. The family got together and consulted, saying, 'We've been washing silk for generations and have never earned more than a few pieces of gold. Now in one morning we can sell the technique for 100. Let's do it.' The customer took the balm and presented it to the king of Wu. When Yue started a war with him, the king made the man a general who led his soldiers through a winter water battle with the men of Yue and beat them big. The man was then enfeoffed as a feudal lord. The power to keep the hands from chapping was one and the same, but one man used it to get an enfeoffment, and another couldn't even use it to avoid washing silk all winter. The difference is all in how the thing is used. You, on the other hand, had a gourd of over 100 pounds. How it is that you never thought of making it into an enormous vessel for yourself and floating through the lakes and rivers in it. Instead, you worried that it was too wide to scoop into anything. Which I guess means the mind of our greatly esteemed master here is still all clogged up, occupied with its bushes and branches."
Huizi said to Zhuangzi, "I have a huge tree that people call the stink tree. The trunk is swollen and gnarled, impossible to align with any level or ruler. The branches are twisted and bent, impossible to align to any T-square or carpenter's arc. Even if it were growing right in the road, a carpenter would not give it so much as a second glance. And your words are similarly big but useless, which is why they are rejected by everyone who hears them."
Zhuangzi said, "Haven't you ever seen the wildcats and weasels? They crouch low to await any straggling prey, then pounce east or west in an elegantly arcing leap, high or low without hesitation. But this is exactly what lands them in a trap, and they end up dying in the net. But take a yak. It is big like the clouds draped across the heavens. What it's good at is just being big. And of course, it cannot catch so much as a single mouse. You, on the other hand, have this big tree and you worry that it's useless. How you could loaf and wander doing a whole lot of nothingy there at its side. How far-flung and unfettered you'd be, dozing there beneath it. It will never be cut down by axe or saw. Nothing will harm it. Since it has nothing for which it can be used, what could entrap or afflict it?